Michael Rothenberg of Flash Panel, who's going to be our presenter today. So, Michael, I'm going to go ahead and let you take it away from here.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. As you mentioned, my name is Michael Rothenberg. I'm a Territory Development Manager at BetterCloud. I have the privilege of working with a lot of our enterprise customers, and drive security is always a question that comes up. So hopefully I could share some of my experience with you guys today, and we'll just get right into the presentation. So if you give me a second, I'm going to switch screens here and get the presentation up for you. So we're ready to go. So drive security. As I mentioned, have the privilege of working with a lot of enterprise customers. Just want to give you a little bit more background about our company, BetterCloud. We do provide management and security software for cloud-enabled organizations around the world. As of today, we're extremely focused on Google Apps. Our flagship product, Flash Panel, is built exclusively for the Google Apps ecosystem. So a lot of our business and our success is tied directly to Google Apps for Business, and we're just really focused in this space. Our team as well, not only are we all Google fans, but we like to call ourselves Google Apps experts. Certifications are paramount at BetterCloud. Everyone in the team has their sales, admin, and deployment certifications, and it is a big requirement over here. Just kind of reiterating the fact of how Google-focused we are as an organization. Just to kind of kick off today's agenda, I want to frame the presentation a little bit. A lot of us are leveraging Google Drive and Google Apps for Business, for their advanced sharing and collaboration tools, and you make that move to the cloud. It's a huge investment. Sometimes years in the making, and you're realizing all these benefits from sharing and collaboration across the globe, and teams living and breathing in one document, as opposed to multiple variations of the same spreadsheet, and PowerPoint and Word doc, and you're starting to realize all these benefits, but then there's these kind of risks that pop up and arguments on the other side where there might be some areas where there's exposure and additional risk that we really want to kind of protect ourselves against. Like any good admin would do, you're gonna evaluate the associated risks and make decisions accordingly. So what's your kind of responsibility as an admin? How do you mitigate these risks? And I'll make the argument that kind of with this three-step approach of user education, which I will kind of point you in the right direction and explain how that pays dividends down the road and in the short term. So with this plan of action, this three-step approach of user education, admin console setup, and a third-party tool like Flash Panel, you can mitigate all these risks associated with Google Drive and really take a step in the right direction with regards to drive security. So what are the sources of risk? There's a lot of different areas where there's exposure in your domain. A lot of different applications are gaining access to your data. This is kind of a paradigm shift from the old on-premise legacy environment where an IT administrator or the IT team would select which applications they want to push out to their users. It's a top-down approach. Now in the Google world that we all live in, our users are going to the Chrome Web Store. They're going to Google Apps add-ons in Drive, in spreadsheets. They're going to the marketplace and installing all these different apps. They're authenticating these apps and granting permissions. And a lot of times they're sensitive permissions. So this is definitely an area where there's some risk and exposure across the entire organization. Anywhere on the internet where you see that sign in with Google button and your user selects that, that's another application that they're authenticating. So just being aware and identifying all these third-party apps is really important to drive security as well as Google App security as a whole. There's a lot of powerful features in Google and Google Drive. You have the ability to share documents publicly. These documents are indexed by a web crawler, are searchable in Google. Anyone on the internet or any search engine could find these documents that you publish. You're giving your users these tools. You want to be able to kind of identify these risks and educate your users, and that's kind of going to be the key theme in the next section. How do we educate our users to use this powerful suite that we've put at their fingertips? So other areas of concern, a lot of people say, maybe this is Google's responsibility. Is Google a cause for concern? And my answer to that argument is no. And kind of, I hate putting up slides with a ton of words on them. It's easy to get lost, but I feel like it's really important to kind of go through this and understand Google's terms of service for Drive. You at the end of the day are the one who controls access to all your files in Drive. Google will not share any of your files and data. It's part of their terms of service and their privacy policy. They make this very clear. They give you the ability through different settings in the admin console and different APIs to take the necessary steps to really lock down your domain. But just reiterating the fact that Google, is not an area for concern in this space. And the platform they've built is very secure, and they will not change a private document to a public one. They will not use a private document for marketing and promotional campaigns, in the Google Apps for Business world. And Google will keep your data as long as you keep it. There's sometimes concern over risk and users deleting documents. With Google, you could pass that message along to your users that there's no need for them to delete documents just because of the amount of space they have. You can take your data with you if you choose to stop using Google Drive. So this is just kind of to reiterate the fact that, I don't believe that Google is a cause for concern when it comes to really, building out a secure, Drive security, best practices internal to your organization. So just a little bit more about Drive security and where the risk is. What's the biggest threat in the organization? And the argument I'm making is that it's your users a lot of times. I think everyone who's probably present in this hangout at one point or another has sent a text message to someone they didn't intend to send it to. And angry spouses or girlfriends aside, those issues often don't result in big data leaks and big problems, and that's a technology that we're extremely comfortable with. Imagine, a user who's never used Google Drive before in your organization. You've just deployed Google Apps. You turn this on and you say, go collaborate, go share. There's going to be errors. There's going to be people sharing documents out inappropriately, and it's rarely from malicious intent. The average enterprise Google Apps for Business domain has 430,000 documents in their Drive. So there's tons of room for user error, and what's the best way to combat this? There's different options you can take. You can lock down the settings in the admin console, which I'll show you a little bit later in the presentation. You can mitigate risk with two-factor authentication, but is that really enough? Because a lot of times it's your users that are pulling the trigger on that share button, and you're really risking loss of intellectual property as well as some reputational damage when these issues do occur. So, with that being said, what's our plan? The first step here being user education. This one is often skipped over, and people don't invest enough resources in change management and education. And I'm really trying to prove to you that this will pay dividends across your organization. Drive is so powerful, just for the reasons of sharing and collaboration. So do we really want to turn that off and be scared to use Drive? But I think a lot of our users don't really understand the real value in Drive, and we need to build that awareness and organizational support and have champions across different OUs in our organization that are big Drive supporters and will take the point on Google Apps education. We need to, as an IT organization, establish acceptable use and best practices for Drive. That way we can educate our users on what those usages are and best practices are as well. We need to provide training and resources, whether it's getting IT admins on the ground a couple of days a week with different teams, showing them how to use different labs, explaining the differences about Drive sharing and the different sharing settings in Google, and really making them aware, or whether it's distributing relevant end user content like the Google Guru website that has a ton of great stuff for admins, but there's also really great stuff in Guru University for end users as well. Now, once you have you've been on Google Apps for a little while, you've educated your user base, you're starting to track adoption, you're running all sorts of reports, seeing what Drive usage looks like. We encourage you to run these reports. Are users creating documents natively within Google, or are they uploading tons of external documents into the domain? That one little report and metric will give you a great view of how well, Google Drive is being adopted across the organization. And as you start to, tip the needle and live in Google Drive, you can start to phase out those legacy systems and save a lot of money on those Microsoft licenses for people who are now religious spreadsheets users instead of Excel, and all the other pieces of the suite that you're paying for when you migrated and deployed Google Apps to your domain. So user education is really one that's skipped over, in the Drive security argument, but I can't emphasize how important it is to really ensuring, long-term success for your domain. And also, your IT help desk people will thank you if you have a sophisticated user base. At the end of the day, there's less tickets about sharing and people not knowing how to use certain pieces of the suite. So there's lots of different benefits from rolling out a really effective user education campaign. The second piece of this plan of action is admin console setup. This is important. Obviously, the admin console is the foundation for everything you do, on the back end in Google Apps. You need to establish a combination of settings that you, as an organization, are comfortable with. It's never a one-man, decision. Usually, you're consulting upper management. What level of comfort do we have with our users? We can take this argument back to education. Do we have faith in the sophistication of our user base that they can share documents out properly? The couple of key settings I want to highlight here is, are we going to allow users to share documents outside of the organization, or aren't we? It's very binary. We see a lot of complaints that how it's just flipping a switch on or off one way or the other. There's no really in between, no level of granularity with how we kind of push out this policy here, and I'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation as well. But if we're allowing our users to share documents outside of the organization, do we want to warn them when they're about to share a document outside the organization? That's always a best practice. Are we allowing them to share outside of the domain to people who are not using a Google account? So one of the benefits here of using Google Drive with regards to sharing documents with external domains is that we still own that document. It's not like we sent them a PDF that they have this they have this copy that's in a frozen state so that they could review whenever they want. If we share a document with them, we have the ability to revoke access and make edits to that document in real time. So that's a big benefit of using Google Drive and Google Docs. So do we want to allow our users to share with people who do not have Google accounts? It might be a decision that you might want to make or not. It's really up to you. And then this third one, this is a big one. Are we going to allow our users to publish documents that are searchable by indexed by a web crawler, searchable in Google? A lot of people say, we would love to turn this on for our marketing team, but we're not comfortable with everyone, doing this across the entire organization. We don't want people publishing documents publicly. Well, that's the only hang up here, is that you can't just turn it on for an OU. And as I mentioned, I will kind of show you the workaround that we have with Flash Panel to kind of, remedy that concern. So just moving along, Drive apps, this is a big one. Are we going to allow our users to download, install, and use Google Drive for Mac and PC? Just a heads up to all the Linux users out there. And I'm sure there's a small minority of them on the Hangout right now. But if you are not allowing your users to use Google Drive for Mac and PC, you can still install a third-party app called Drive that will mimic that functionality. So your users will have this tool on their desktop through a third-party app. And there's really no way of catching that without a third-party apps tool like the one that Flash Panel offers, and I will show you in the next section. So just really important to be conscious of all these things. The settings are not foolproof, in some respects, but they are essential to kind of establish a baseline of Drive security for your organization. Some of the other settings here that are important to note: are we going to allow our users to install Google Drive apps? There's so much power in Google Drive, and we could have all these add-ons that really add a ton of value and productivity for our end users and really help them get off of those legacy systems by leveraging every piece of the suite. Do we want to give them those benefits, or are we going to make it a lockdown environment and kind of not, I don't want to say necessarily live in fear, but kind of take the old on-premise approach to things. I think we can trust our user base to make decisions around third-party apps and which Drive apps to install, but you need a tool on the back end to kind of monitor this from a high level, and I'll show you that in the next section. So a little bit about Flash Panel, just to kind of pause for a second and talk about some of the things that we've had up until this point. We're kind of laying out this plan of action for creating an effective Drive security plan for your organization. This is best practice, and will really kind of help you better manage your domain from a Drive perspective. And with Flash Panel, we give you the ability to kind of discover where and expose where these gaps are and different exposures in the organization. We give you the tools to take action, and then you can set policies to automate a lot of this management. And the couple of tools I'm going to talk about are the Drive Explorer, Drive sharing policies, and third-party apps. Just as a side note, Flash Panel is a comprehensive admin security reporting and automation tool for Google Apps. I'm going to be focused on the Drive security aspect of that today, and I just want to highlight, going along with our presentation, how the Drive Explorer, the sharing policies, and the third-party apps can help you better secure your Google Drive and your domain as a whole. So if we come into the Drive Explorer, this is a screenshot, and it's a pretty consistent look and feel, across all of our Google Apps tools, where you're going to have filters across the top. We can drill down into all of our Drive docs in various ways. If I want to pull up all of an individual user's documents, I want to apply an additional filter on exposure, and then I want to pull in a third filter and say, show me all the docs that have been updated within the last month that have the public exposure for this user, Eli. I can pull those documents up. I can edit permissions in bulk if I want to change the sharing setting from public to private. I also have the ability to transfer ownership of all of this user's documents in bulk by editing the permissions and highlighting all of his documents. We can tweak and manipulate the filters in different ways to manually drill down and pull up different documents. Lots of different things we can do with the Explorer, and it is a manual process until you get a feel for what, as an organization, what are we most concerned about and where's the exposure. You're going to be, playing around with the Explorer trying to find different documents that might be red flags. There's also another area within the Drive Explorer that's important to note. Are we going to, in the admin console, if you are not allowing your users to share publicly, there's a second checkbox that says, are you allowing them to receive documents from outside of the organization? Another potential security risk, an area where there's some exposure. This is documents owned outside the organization, shared in. Our end users are contributing content. Might be sensitive information that they're putting on these externally owned docs. We want to be able to see those documents, investigate, reach out to our users and see what the deal is. We can do that with this tool. Then we also have the ability to create policies to automate all this management. So this is the manual investigative audit that we can do with the Drive Explorer, messing around with the filters, running different reports. You can also schedule these reports to run, but then we have Drive sharing policies. How does the scoping work for a Drive sharing policy? Who does it apply to? When we were going through the admin console section, I've said it a couple times now, it's all or nothing. There's no granularity with how we're pushing out this policy. It's either on or off for everyone. Okay, in the case of the marketing team that we really want them to share something out publicly, I can create a policy for everyone and exclude the marketing team. Or maybe we just have one OU in our organization, like the finance team, that has access to very sensitive information that we're keen to lock down. We can do that as well by pushing out a Drive sharing policy to that one OU. The way the policy will work, it's going to say, here are the standard, the set of conditions that we're concerned about, public sharing, public with a link, external domains. There might be a level of comfort in your organization with people sharing directly with an external domain. You have partner companies, other domains that you work with on a lot of projects. You might have a level of comfort there, but you want to go in and blacklist personal accounts because you don't want your end users sharing all these documents with their own personal accounts. There's definitely risk in that activity. Once we create the sharing policy, we decide, do we want to run this in an audit mode? So we have the ability to say, I'm going to hold off a little bit. I don't necessarily, want to take action and throw off my users. I kind of just want to report and audit this a little bit, see what's going to trigger a red flag, a positive result. So I could run the report as is, pull that data. It's automatically going to populate in my Drive Explorer where I can drill in, preview the content, reach out to users, kind of get a feel for how people are sharing before we, turn into the police and start, changing ownership on docs and correcting sharing settings. But once you get that level of comfort and you want to push out this policy and enforce it, you can do that with some of the additional settings in the policy creator. You can send out end user sharing alerts. Just like you can warn a user in Google before they share a document out publicly, you can send them an email letting them know that they've violated, your company's acceptable use of Drive sharing. Just going back to user education, I'm sure you're not surprised how fast users react when they get a violation notice of any kind from a system. So that's one piece of this. The next piece of this is locking down third-party apps. When we talked about our sources and areas where there's risk and exposure, third-party apps is one that comes up consistently, and it is tough. We're giving this really powerful suite to our users, and we're going to tell them to make the right decisions. But a lot of times it's just not intentional. It's not malicious. We are, install an application that, our company is not comfortable with. We're authenticating and giving OAuth permissions to all these third-party apps. How do you wrap your head around it as an IT admin or someone in, an InfoSec team? With this tool, you have the ability to filter based on the specific permissions that have been granted by a specific app. We also have FlashPanel's permission score, which is an algorithm that we created that ranks how risky a given app is based on the permission set that it's requesting. Another key factor to take into consideration here is domain-wide access. Obviously, an application that's installed by an admin is, for the entire domain is inherently riskier than a random app installed by an end user, just because of the level of data that application is going to have access to. We can click into any application on the domain. We can view all the users that have installed that application. We can revoke access for individual users. We can also make the decision to blacklist this application for the entire domain and send a custom blacklist notification letting them know why we've blacklisted a particular app. So that being said, that's the manual approach. How do we automate this? We can set up an Apps Explorer policy. And the way the policy engine works here, it's going to say that if any or all of the below conditions are true, we're going to take a certain action. So what are those permissions? Those are some of the more sensitive permissions like read-write drive, read-write email. If I want to see those users that are using the Drive app, for Linux, maybe I go in and filter and pull up that app and blacklist it, send them a custom notification. But what if there's other apps out there like that? I want to see all the email apps. I want to take a certain action on these. Maybe it's on the level of access that's granted. Am I going to put applications that have full domain access on our radar and take a certain action? Maybe I'm going to utilize FlashPanel's permission score as a baseline level of comfort that our security and IT teams have with third-party apps in general. Then what action are we going to take? Are we going to blacklist this application right out of the gate, or are we going to leave this app as unresolved, manually go in and investigate, reach out to our users, try and understand why they've installed a specific app? So lots of different things we can do here with regards to apps policies and having greater security around the third-party apps in our domain as it relates to Drive and the domain as a whole. A little bit more about FlashPanel security and our company. We're committed to security and privacy of our customers. We have our SSAE 16 SOC 1 Type 1 certification. We're currently undergoing evaluation for our Type 2 certification. We are US EU Safe Harbor certified, and we also have our TrustE certification. And if there's any questions or concerns about any of FlashPanel's security practices, feel free to reach out directly to me. I'll be giving my contact information at the end of the presentation, and we can tackle any of those issues for you. We definitely appreciate being given this forum at BetterCloud to present FlashPanel and our take on Drive security and show you some of our security tools. So we want to thank everyone for joining the Hangout on air today. And for existing FlashPanel customers who are on FlashPanel Basic, we're going to offer you a new 10-day trial of FlashPanel Enterprise. If you're new to FlashPanel, we are going to give you a free 30-day trial if you go to the marketplace, flashpanel.com/marketplace. And just as kind of a side note and a tip for everyone on the Hangout on Air today, we are raising our prices in July. So if you have any pricing concerns or questions or are interested in upgrading, before the end of the month, please reach out to me directly at michael@bettercloud.com. And just to kind of reiterate that, we are raising our prices for FlashPanel Enterprise next month. So if you're interested in upgrading, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and we'll get you an official price quote and get the ball rolling with that. I definitely appreciate the opportunity to kind of talk to you guys about Drive security, and don't hesitate to reach out and contact us if any questions come up.
All right. Thanks a lot, Michael. It was a great presentation, and it looks like we have a lot of really good questions here that I'd like to get to. I'll try to tackle some of these myself, and I'm going to pass some along to Michael as well, and he can chime in. I think the top question that we have here is about Google Drive and HIPAA compliance. I know Google announced this was in October of last year that they would sign a business associate agreement with customers who required HIPAA compliance. I think if that's something that you are looking for and is a prerequisite for you using Google Apps or Google Drive specifically, I would probably suggest working with a Google Apps reseller and ensure that you're following all the correct compliance practices. Just as a safe bet. I know that there are companies, resellers specifically, that have handled situations like these where they're dealing with HIPAA compliance. So you won't be the first company to run into the same issue, the first organization. Another really good question about security for a Google Apps for Education domain, or I guess not for education, but so my company is worried about putting sensitive financial documents into Google Drive and Google Apps. How can I convince them that Google Drive is more secure than our local server room? We get this question every once in a while, and the thing that I always try to point out is that on your local server room, your files are stored there. That's the only place. The only thing preventing someone from stealing your sensitive information is by breaking into your server room or hacking your local devices. Whereas with Google, your files are distributed across a number of different servers. All of your information is not stored in one specific server. So having your information distributed, across a number of different locations with much more intense security practices locally, I think is a really important thing to note. And then with files specifically, comparing Google Drive files to, for example, the concern that we hear a lot is, sharing files on Google Drive isn't as secure as sending an attachment. Well, if you really think about it, sharing files on Google Drive is significantly more secure. If you send an attachment to someone, that file is gone. There's no getting it back. They can make copies. They can distribute it with whoever they want. With sharing files on Google Drive, you have the same sort of experience, but at least you still retain ownership, which is a huge thing. You are the owner of that file. They can't take away ownership from the file. You can always revoke access to the file with someone that you've shared it with. So I think that's something to keep in mind for specific files. We've got another question here about super admins being able to see the actual file names of Google Drive files. If you have a document that says plan to terminate the IT director, will they be able to see that file name? I think if you're talking about terminate, I'm not sure if terminating is firing or something a little bit more malicious, but if you're if it's your Google Drive for business or for education account, maybe that's not something that you want to be discussing in that sort of environment. Another Good question. Is there a way to change ownership of only a specific collection of Google Drive files to a different user? So in the admin console, you're limited to transferring all of the user's files to another user. Michael, do you want to touch on if that's possible using Flash Panel? I know it's not possible in the admin console.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. Yes, it is possible using Flash Panel. Kind of how I was illustrating, how we could use those filters to drill down and find the individual documents. We also give you the ability to kind of edit those permissions in bulk, and we don't have to select all of them. So we can go in and select which docs that we want to transfer ownership of. So we do give you that level of control with the Drive Explorer and transferring ownership of docs. And kind of yeah, so I hope that answered that question. I just wanted to kind of build on, Andrew, what you said, regarding the first question about, how do you make the case internally in your organization that, Drive is more secure than your on-premise, legacy environment. And I have this discussion with customers all the time, and thankfully I have the benefit of, working with, 99% of the people I work with are already on Google Apps and they're committed to Google, but, it's kind of how data is one of our most sensitive assets, right? It's our most valuable thing. If you think back 100 years for a company or a small business owner, what was their most important asset? It was their money, right? And 100 years ago, you would store that you would store your money probably under the carpet, under your mattress, in a safe, in your store. Today, you would never find a small business owner or a large company that's keeping these large safes with their money, on premise, in the basement somewhere. It's just not something that happens. There's a paradigm shift at one point in time where banks come into play, and they're taking ownership of the money now and the most valuable resources, and they're distributing it to different locations across the world to keep it secure. I kind of like to draw that comparison with how we think about data in the Google world today. We're trusting Google, and Google does a great job of securing and locking down our data, and it stores it in different locations and different servers across, U.S. and Canada. So that's kind of how I like to position it to people who, are kind of holding on to the on-premise, argument. And I know it's not a solid comparison. It's not, pound for pound, but it is just a kind of good way to visualize it and think about data and how we store it and, how this paradigm shift is happening.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Michael. All right, let's see if we can tackle some more of these questions here. Taking a look at the moderator that we have set up. So someone is asking if there's a way to password protect files in Google Drive. Great question. That's not something that's available natively in Google Drive. So you would have to look into using an app script possibly, or a third-party tool. I think if you take a look in the Google Apps Marketplace, you might be able to find a product there that can help you password protect files in Drive. Another question, so for a Google Apps for Education environment, you manage both staff and student domains in the admin and the Google Apps console. What's the best method for preventing staff from inadvertently sharing with students? So I think Michael touched on this a little bit earlier, but preventing, so I guess students would not be able to, wouldn't want students to be able to receive shared files from teachers, or Michael, do you know if there's a way to handle that in Flash Panel?
Yeah, and this is something that does come up a lot of times, especially with K through 12 districts that have thousands of students at all different grade levels. They don't want the email addresses auto-populated for certain users or groups of users. So they're you're comfortable with your staff and faculty having that kind of auto-population of all the students and all the staff and faculty, but maybe you want to take it a step further and you don't want your 10th graders accidentally sharing documents with the third graders that you just rolled out Drive to. And I have seen third graders with Drive accounts more and more, so it's not that shocking of a statement. But you want to kind of control this auto-populating and how people are sending emails and sharing. So what you can do is you can use Flash Panel's shared contacts by tag tool to then in turn turn off the Google directory and use the shared contacts by tag to give each user an appropriate OU or an appropriate grade level access to their set of contacts. That way, when they go to share, a doc or send an email to someone at their class level or in their grade level, they're sharing it with the right user that's in their contacts. So that's one way of kind of getting around that, and it's a popular use case for the shared contacts tool.
A couple other questions that I wanted to touch on. So a question here, let's see, one of the most popular questions, when a user shares a doc with another user and then transfers ownership to, so the question is about having a admin account or a master account that is the default owner of all Google Drive files, and the issue there seems to be if you do have this root folder, that there are duplicates that seem to pop up with the same file, which can cause a lot of confusion, especially if you have hundreds or thousands of files on Google Drive. I'm not certain of a solution to that. I was doing some quick research during the presentation. It seems like a lot of people have that issue outside of this Hangout as well. So that's something that I'll look into, and we can keep you guys updated if we find a good solution for that. We might be able to discuss that during the roundtable session that we're hosting on Thursday with a few other admins who may have some thoughts on that. A question about having files in a shared folder where users can edit the files but not move the files out of the folder. So you're essentially having edit access to the files but not to the folder itself. I'm not sure if there is a solution to that right now, and I can't really comment on on Google's plans to add that feature. But I'll agree with you that it definitely would. This definitely seems like a much needed feature for sure.